This is Plant-Based Briefing, The Truth Behind the Numbers, Part 2, by Sailesh Rao at climatehealers.org. And I'm Marian Erickson, host of this curated content plant-based podcast, where I narrate a variety of articles on plant-based and vegan living in about 10 minutes or less every weekday with permission. And this article was longer than that, so it's a two-parter. I read the first half yesterday, so go back and listen to that first so that this half will make sense. And I'm pleased to have permission from Dr. Sailesh Rao at Climate Healers to share their amazing content. So now let's get to today's plant-based briefing. The Truth Behind the Numbers by Dr. Sailesh Rao at climatehealers.org. Details behind the various percentage figures associated with the climate impact of animal agriculture. FAO 2013, the 14% estimate, Question A, emissions components 1 to 3, and GWP 100. This estimate is for Question A, how much of the annual climate impact is caused by animal agriculture, and it was compiled with the GWP 100 metric using just 3 emissions components, carbon dioxide, methane, and nitrous oxide. It was authored by the UN Food and Agriculture Organization, FAO, in conjunction with the International Meat Secretariat, the International Dairy Federation, the International Poultry Council, and the International Egg Commission as part of the Livestock Environmental Assessment and Performance, or LEAP, partnership in 2013. This is the animal agriculture industry's self-calculated estimate of the emissions contribution of the industry. It used outdated statistics from 1964, 1982, 93, 99, 2001, and 2002 without proper date corrections. It used efficient first-world processes from Minnesota as representative in order to calculate the impact of global operations, even though most of the world is not as technologically well-equipped as Minnesota. It failed to correct for known undercounting of farmed animal numbers. And finally, it omitted emissions from the manufacturing of all secondary byproducts of the animal agriculture industry, such as leather, and all fishing operations. However, this is the most often quoted estimate, even by vegan activists. FAO 2006, the 18% estimate, also Question A, emissions components 1 to 3, and GWP 100. This estimate is for Question A, how much of the annual climate impact is caused by animal agriculture, and it was compiled with the GWP 100 metric using just 3 emissions components. It was authored by the UN Food and Agriculture Organization, FAO, in 2006, and it contained all of the errors and omissions listed above for the 14% estimate. IPCC 2021, the 24% estimate. This estimate is for Question B, how much of the cumulative climate impact is caused by animal agriculture. It was compiled with the same 3 emissions components and was authored by the UN Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change in its 6th Assessment Report of 2021. EDGAR, the 34% estimate, Question A, emissions components 1 through 4, and GWP 100. This estimate is for Question A, how much of the annual climate impact is caused by animal agriculture, with the GWP 100 metric using 4 emissions components, the first 3 plus halocarbons. It was authored by scientists at the Joint Research Center of the European Commission. However, they used land use change data from the UN FAO. This estimate also included food processing, distribution, and waste emissions, and therefore it was a life cycle estimate, whereas the ones above only considered production emissions. GA 2009, the 51% estimate. Question A, emissions components 1 to 3 and 12, and GWP 20. This estimate is for Question A, the annual impact, and it is a lower bound compiled with the GWP 20 metric using the first 3 emissions components as well as a carbon opportunity cost, or COC, component. It was authored by Goodland and Anhag, environmental assessment specialists at the World Bank Group. The report identified the errors and omissions in the UN FAO's 18% and 14% estimates as listed above. In their original report, the authors utilized a 20-year time frame for methane released as a consequence of animal agriculture, but a 100-year time frame for methane released from other sources. This is an error in their report, which was corrected in our position paper linked here by treating the breathing contribution of farmed animals plus the overlooked land use component as COC, and therefore not part of direct emissions. Using the GWP 100 metric instead of GWP 20, the total for the greenhouse gas emissions contribution of animal agriculture on an annual basis is 55%. GWB 2025, the 53% estimate. Question B, emissions components 1 through 11, ERF. This estimate is for question B, how much of the cumulative climate impact is caused by animal agriculture, and was compiled with the ERF metric using 11 emissions components, with only carbon opportunity cost as the missing component. It was authored by Gerard Weddenburn Bishop and published in the Environmental Research Letters in 2025. This is an estimate that included all cooling effects, not just the heating effects. It also used gross land use change CO2 emissions so that it is consistent with the gross accounting for fossil fuel-based CO2 emissions. In the 1996 guidelines, the UN IPCC mixed net land use change with gross fossil fuel-based CO2 emissions, causing statistical confusion, which likely led to the ineffective climate mitigation policies that the world has experienced over the past 3 decades. JH 2025, the 66% estimate. Question B, emissions components 1 through 11, ERF. This estimate is for question B, and it was compiled with the ERF metric using 11 emissions components, with only carbon opportunity cost, or COC, as the missing component. It is an update of Gerard Weddenburn Bishop's 53% estimate, taking into account the increased potency of SO2 as a cooling gas and the increased CO2 doubling sensitivity as reported in Hansen et al. 2025, linked here. CH 2019, the 87% estimate. Question A, emissions components 1 through 3 and 12, GWP 20. This estimate is for question A, and it is a lower bound compiled with the GWP 20 metric using 3 emissions components, as well as a carbon opportunity cost component. This is an update on Goodland and Ann Hang's 51% estimate, with the COC corrected to include soil and root systems, as well as above-ground vegetation components. It assumes that soil and root systems can store twice as much CO2 as above-ground vegetation, which is the lower limit of the range supplied in the 5th assessment report of the UN IPCC. Using the GWP 100 metric instead of GWP 20, the sector contribution of animal agriculture would rise to 102%. CH 2021, the 118% estimate. Question A, emissions components 1 through 3 and 12, and GWP 20. This estimate is for question A, and it is a lower bound compiled with the GWP 20 metric using 3 emissions components, as well as a carbon opportunity cost component. This is an update on the Goodland and Ann Hang's 51% estimate, with the COC corrected to include soil and root systems, as well as above-ground vegetation components. It assumes that the soil and root systems can store 3.7 times as much CO2 as above-ground vegetation, which is the ratio supplied in the 6th assessment report of the UN IPCC. Using the GWP 100 metric instead of GWP 20, this estimate would rise to at least 140% from 118% for the greenhouse gas emissions contribution of animal agriculture on an annual basis. Where the truth lies. In reality, the estimates for both questions should take into account all 12 emissions components, not just a subset of them. If we use ERF as the metric of choice, we can augment the 66% estimate with a COC component to answer question B. In order to answer question A, we need to compute the derivative of the answer to question B. This analysis is being conducted at the moment, and we will report on our findings shortly. Please stay tuned. You just listened to The Truth Behind the Numbers, Part 2 by Dr. Sailesh Rao at climatehealers.org, and I'm your host, Marian Erickson. If this was a little dry for you, as it is for me, I apologize, but I think it's such an important topic. I've always wondered why there are such huge differences in these numbers that are quoted. And I listen to podcasts and I hear these amazing climate scientists talking about the different numbers and where these lower estimates are wrong, and my eyes kind of glaze over. So it's kind of neat to have this summarized in one place, and I look forward to the results of the current analysis they're doing. And as always, I put a link to the original post in the show notes, so you can find some graphs and some additional information in there that might be helpful. And if you'd like to check out some related episodes, check out 297, Animal Agriculture may be responsible for 87% of greenhouse gas emissions, and 978, Food is Climate. So please share this episode with anyone who might benefit, and thanks for listening.